Well, here I am after the previous video where I was talking all about chaos and order and how things just fall apart into a mess of things. And if you notice, my hair back then in that video was horrible, and I failed to mention that is a perfect example. And ladies usually have more hair unless you're a nature-loving hippie like I am, and let the hair grow like the plants and the grass. But typically in culture, the women, unless they want to chop it off, but women have long hair, and women know more about this stuff, unless you relate it to beard growth in men. So you know that things will get out of order, and within a day or after you sleep and you get up and hey, there's chaos. That's a perfect example of it, which hits close to home. It's right on your head. So here's the subject of this video, though. Now that I know you've watched the first one, or maybe you'll watch it after this one, I want to talk about ice, because I'm doing a series on materials and matter. Actually, no, I shouldn't do that, because it'll hinder my way of talking, and that's rude. So the thing about ice is that we have ice ages, which basically everybody has heard about. But what are the details that we know? And I've been studying this very intently for a while now, and basically what I can tell you is, like, the main things to be concerned about is that civilization was really affected by the changes in the polar ice caps. In this way, here's some of the details you might not have heard. We have to go back all the way to about 20,000 years ago. And 20,000 years ago, we had a maximum glaciation. Okay, so really, here's the curious thing. We're actually in the middle of an ice age right now, because ice ages have two phases that they go through. There's the glaciation phase, which means it's icing over, and there's more and more ice at the poles, and also on the tops of the highest mountains. And then you start to melt the ice, and you get to this interglacial period. So interglaciation is when there's less ice, there's only a little bit of ice in the winter, relatively, at the polar areas, but it is expected that there will be another glaciation with an increase of ice, and it will start to cover the lower latitudes. You know, it'll start to extend further and further south. So that's the accurate use of those terms. We're still in an ice age, folks. I hate to break the news to you, those of you in 110-degree weather like myself, but this is the ice age. Now, what we're really concerned about is when there's more ice during the glaciation period. So glaciation reached its maximum. The glacial extent was the furthest it was going to go on the Earth. It was like the most ice that we've had since then. The maximum was, they date it to about 20,000 years ago, approximately. So what happened was, it starts to melt. So they measure these things by studying all kinds of ice cores and, you know, moraines and different evidence of where the rocks were pushed and the scratches, you know, any kind of evidence that can lead them to study the effects, the ancient prehistoric effects of the ice movement, the glacier movement. And they come up with these periods of MWP, which is meltwater, and apparently the first one that took place after the 20,000 year maximum was about around 14,000 years ago, give or take 1,000 years. So this maximum glaciation held sway for thousands of years, and then it starts to melt. Now, what happened when it melted? Several things. But the main thing I want to talk about today is the rise of sea level around the Earth. So it just starts to flood out in certain areas, and it pours out, you know, depending on, it's not all of a sudden, instantly, sea level rises equally. It just has to form, you know, a stasis, and that takes many, many, many years. It takes a long time. So you have a rise of like 50 feet or more after this first huge melt. And then you have, it slows down with the melting until you hit another great melt-off, the MWP. And this was about 12,000 years ago or less. Now this is a major one. This is a really major one because it really skyrockets. So I'm not so sure how quickly it happened, but it could have happened in a short amount of time. Now, I don't know if that's relatively short, or 10 years, or even relatively short would be in 100 years. But the rise at that time was almost 100 feet. Okay, so there's been 2 other melt-offs to get to the point we are now in the present age. 2 more melt-offs that were raising it 20 feet, 30 feet, depending on how you're measuring it, which period of time. So if you measure the entire time since 20,000 years ago, they say that it's 120 meters, or about 360 feet, that sea level has risen in that amount of time. Not steadily, not all at once, but as I said, in these melt-off spurts, these phases where it melts off and you have this, the level of the sea going up. Right now they measure, depending on what system you're using, what technology, they're saying that each year the sea level is rising either 2 millimeters or like 4 or more millimeters per year. And that's depending on where you measure it and how you use the satellites and this and that, or tidal measurements. So that doesn't seem like a lot, but if you add that up at that rate, and what do you get in like 20 years? 20 times like 2 millimeters is 40 millimeters. That's 4 centimeters. 4 centimeters like this. Like, that's going to flood a lot of islands and low-lying areas. They're going to get flooded with seawater. So let's take this in perspective with the large melt-off about 12,000 years ago. As I said in my other videos, there was high civilization at that time that most of science, which are stupid and ignorant, don't want to admit. But it is absolutely true, I'm sure of it. All the evidence is there, and there wouldn't be any reason to doubt it anyhow. Even if you didn't find that much evidence, why would you limit human civilization to just a few thousand years? Well, because your interpretation of some books says so? That's really flawed thinking. So if you think about pre-melt-off, 12,000 years ago, or going back, say, 13,000 years ago, there was a high level of civilization reached in a stable period of the Earth's history and the Earth's environment. And a lot of it was in the coastal areas. And I should On the video icon, I'm going to put a map of the Earth at that time. I'm going to just rattle off a few regions which were not underwater at that time, and where they are finding the remnants of ruined cities, lost civilization, and regions where if they did exploration, they're going to find it. Okay? So we're talking about the Gulf of Mexico, basically the entire southern coast of the southeast United States, and all the way off the coast of Florida toward the Bahamas, and a lot of up the east coast was not flooded. It would extend out like 100 or more miles. Okay, so basically half of the Gulf of Mexico was dry land. Well, it wasn't dry land because the Mississippi was a much larger system, and would keep that whole area very swamp-like. It probably was. I'm not exactly sure, because they should be able to tell from the fossil record of the plants and the animals. But let's not go into details here. I'm going to give you some more regions. There's a region of Southeast Asia, from where Vietnam comes down, and Thailand and Malaysia, where it comes down, and you have the island nation of Indonesia, and also Malaysia has an island, and the Philippines, and you've got Sumatra, Borneo, New Guinea, and all that stuff. And it even extends down into Australia. So that whole section, and it's very huge. It's humongous. If you take a look at the globe, a lot of that was dry land. So those islands were connected, and the islands were connected to the peninsula of Malaysia, and in fact some of the islands in that area could have been connected with the northern part of Australia. So there's a name for this section that was all contiguous at that time. It's called Sundaland. I'm not too sure about where they get the origin of that, or if the people that name that are aware that there was civilization prior to 12,000 years ago. But the term is Sundaland, if you want to look it up. Now, other areas, the British Isles, okay? Everything north of France, the Netherlands, Belgium, all that area, Denmark, that North Sea area is very shallow. So 12,000 years ago, before the sea rose, it was all dry land. So England was connected to the mainland, Ireland was connected to England, and it was also connected over to Scandinavia. So during the time, actually, if you go further back, when there was glaciation, the ice was covering over there, and it covered land. So if it would melt off, or you would navigate around up into there, you're basically in the North Sea area on tundra land and the ice sheet that came from the North Pole there. So that's pretty wild. You know, it's saying the British Isles in relatively recent history were not even islands. The North Sea didn't even exist like that, and the Baltic, which is actually a bay, it's not a sea, which goes in there and goes up towards St. Petersburg and all that area there, the Baltics. That was like maybe some lakes, but it wasn't even water there. It wasn't continuous water. So let me think if there was another area. Well, the other major one, which is often talked about, is the Bering Land Strait, the land bridge that they're always saying brought Asian people over to North America. But in fact, I have a lot of people and research that I've done that say it was the other way around, that actually people started out in what is now the Americas and migrated the other way. But there's no proof of it either way, because there's no way of knowing which civilization predates the other one yet. We have to do a lot more research into that. And besides which, another thing which is doubted by stupid, ignorant science, which I'm going to tell you right now, is there was seafaring cultures, seafaring nations, seafaring civilization prior to 12,000 years ago. You better believe it. And there's a lot of evidence for that, and again, why doubt it? People are going to figure out how to cross the ocean, even if it's in a little boat. And back then, you probably had huge periods of time where the oceans were relatively more calm, and it was easier to cross it. Today, with all of our industry, we are affecting the way the environment reacts to us. There's an increase of hurricanes, tornadoes, squalls, super waves. This ridiculous stuff that's happening is because of human contamination of the environment, human extreme changes that are going on. Not the least of which is emissions, greenhouse gases, just from burning petroleum. Petroleum. Don't believe the lies. Don't believe their nonsense. They're just trying to sell more oil, and they're trying to justify their crimes. They're going down big time. I'll tell you right now. You can't stop me. I'm going to hack them down with a hatchet in the back of the head. So this is not political, but I want to tell you that prehistory is amazing. Sometimes I can just delve into it for days, because it tells us that if the sea level is rising now and all of our coastal areas where people live are going to get inundated, those people are going to be wandering nomads, and they're probably going to die because they can't survive without all their things. So if you think of that, several billion people that are going to be displaced and basically put on the chopping block. I would not, as I said, I would not be living anywhere on the western coastal areas of large bodies of water, because that's where crap can really happen when the shit hits the fan. But if you don't want to heed that, go ahead, be part of the lemmings. That's fine. Actually, there's nothing that can be done to help people because we're not sure really where to go, and it comes down to divine providence. Divine providence. You just have to pray. There's a lot you can do, like what I am involved with research and understanding things, but as I'm a religious man, I always come back to prayer. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. Really, a planet comes in, or the earth cracks open, more earthquakes, volcanoes, the sun is going to be blotted out, etc., 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 etc. Not even to mention nuclear war. You just got to pray. I'm alive today, and I can still study, and I want to inspire people with knowledge while we're still alive. Because that's the thing. If people existed then, and all their coastal areas were flooded, and they lost everything, you basically, if you've got a palace, or like this, great mansion, where you throw these lavish parties, and if you're not corrupt, if it's a golden age, and all your friends are coming over, and all of a sudden, you're the generation that's going to have to lose it all in the floods. We've been through this before, folks. So history is interesting like that, and it can be useful because we see that we're not the first ones. Our ancestors have gone through this. Now, in closing, I just want to give you like a little comparison to a book, a world famous book called the Bible, wherein the first part of it is Genesis, and it talks about a flood during Noah's time, Noah. So Noah was this guy, perhaps more righteous, and he got the signal from up above, like maybe from divine prayer. He got the message that you better build a boat because you're going to be floating around on water for a long time. Everything on land is going to be destroyed. Now, is this a story which harkens back to the time of the great melt-off 12,000 years ago? Because that's probably when it was. It probably wasn't during the other ones. because they were less melt-offs. They weren't like really cataclysmic rise of the sea level. Excuse me. As I said, there was two other ones in more recent memory, like several thousand years ago, but the most major one was about 12,000 years ago. So what does that say about the timing in the Bible? Because if you add up the genealogies, it doesn't say that it's more than 3 to 4,000, no, not 3,000, about 4,000, between 4,000 to 5,000 years ago that Noah existed. So, who knows? Some of these global flood myths have to do with cataclysmic melt-off and flooding and sea level rising, maybe not of the same periods of time. Maybe they don't all talk about one event. Maybe they talk about several phases of universal flooding on the face of the earth, one of them being 12,000 years ago, but other ones that occurred more recent. So this is a big question, and I'm not sure how to figure it out right now. I don't have all the data. All I'm giving you is a plausible theory. Thanks for listening. Leave your comments. Share this with all your friends. Favorite it and thumbs up, and make sure you're subscribed. Do I look like Anderson Cooper to you?